I discovered my bliss when I was at BU at COM, and I realized I love writing, I love putting out a message. So I would say, what's your bliss? And if you've taken a career path other than what you might have done in college or, whatever it is, don't be afraid to do it.
Hello and welcome to Proud to Be You, the alumni podcast from Boston University. I'm your host, Jeff Murphy. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing on the show, I hope that you'll take a minute and subscribe to our newsletter for bonus content and giveaways. You can do that now on our website at bu.edu/proudtobeyou. My guest today is Mary McManus, a COM PR alum who went on to a rewarding social work career that was unfortunately brought to an early and abrupt end following the horrific medical diagnosis. Mary joined me to talk about resilience, recovery, the mind-body connection, and living the kind of a life that allows someone to thrive in a second act. A warning for our listeners, Mary does share some very difficult subjects, including a discussion about a family member's suicide.
Proud to Be You showcases the journeys of some of Boston University's most interesting and accomplished alumni. Inspiring grads share the highs, the lows, and the challenges they've overcome along the way from ComAv to innovative careers. No matter where your path takes you, be proud to be you.
Mary, wonderful to have you here on the Proud to Be You podcast. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. I am so happy to be here and to share my experiences of how BU has been an integral part of my journey from being in school and then after school and being with you today.
Yeah, and we were connected because you were just recently featured in the Bostonia, the alumni magazine. They had a whole feature on alumni who are doing sort of a second act. And that is something we will link to in the show notes and everything. People need to take a look at it. But I thought I wanted to start here. I mean, your childhood, unbelievable. You were one of the last cases of polio in the US, right? What do you remember about being a kid, and how old were you when you got that diagnosis?
I was 5 years old. I was in my kindergarten year. It was in June of 1959. And everyone always asked me, Jeff, did you get vaccinated? I did. I had 5 vaccines, but I was playing with my best friend whose mother was unvaccinated. And she contracted polio the same day I did. So we figure that that's how it happened. So I literally dropped to the ground in gym class. And I don't remember how I got home. They did do a spinal tap at home. Back in the day, that's what they did to get the diagnosis. But just on the clinical exam, my neck was stiff. I was paralyzed from the waist, from the neck down. And they tested, below the waist to see what the leg functioning and the muscle function was. And he said it was polio, and the spinal tap confirmed that. So I was paralyzed initially from the neck down. And then I started getting some feeling back on my right side. The March of Dimes came to the house, and they were an incredible organization. And they said that I was one of the lucky ones. And I was, Jeff. I mean, I wasn't in an iron lung. I wasn't in the hospital. But I started to started physical therapy, and I was put in a full leg brace on my left leg, which was the weaker leg, and I was on crutches. And I had the most incredible physical therapist that we'll talk about as part of my second act. But yeah, it was awful. It was truly awful. It was so painful. And I just knew somehow that I was going to make it through. I actually, during the fever, I had an out-of-body experience. And I came back, but I did meet my guardian angel, and I was reeled up in a well bucket in this. You can say it's a hallucination or it was a fever, but in my heart, I really felt it was a touch of grace. And so, after I had this encounter with this being, I knew that I was going to be okay. And as I do share, my mom was unable to care for me. She was addicted to prescription pain medication. My dad and grandfather did care for me during that time and got me to this wonderful physiatrist and physical therapist. But when I went back to school, I was on crutches. And of course, initially I couldn't be a part of athletics at all. But then I came out of the leg brace and I still limped, but I was still part of gym class. And back then, Jeff, there was no disability awareness. So I was, taunted and teased. My nickname was Easy Out Alper. And I know it wasn't fun. But the amazing thing was, I'll just share with you quickly. I had this one day in gym class. Everybody moves in from the outfield, right? Because Easy Out Alper is up to bat. And it was kickball. And on this one particular day, I don't know what happened, but I connected with the ball and nobody was in the outfield. So I made a home run. So, those are the moments that I really like to focus on during the journey.
How long are you out of school? Once you're back in school, how long are you still dealing with the effects of the disease, wearing braces, all those kinds of things?
So it was summer. So I was out of school for the summer. There wasn't any school. I missed my kindergarten graduation. And then I went back in school in September. I dealt with braces for probably a good 2 years. And then came out of the brace, but still very limited in terms of my physicality. Academically, I decided that's where I was going to put my energies. So and I was in physical therapy until I was in my teen years.
Oh, wow. So in your teen years, focused academically, that's obviously how you're able to get into BU. But what was it about Boston University that made you want to come here? And what were you thinking at that point you might want to do for a career?
Well, I wanted to be a doctor. And BU, back in the day, I don't know if this is still true or not, but back in the day, we used to joke and say that BU is Long Island and Westchester University, BU campus, because growing up in Westchester, it was the place I wanted to be. And when I first visited Boston, when I was a senior in high school, I fell in love with it and fell in love with BU. My guidance counselor, Mr. Sarmento, it's so funny how, we remember these people. He actually was a BU alum, and he encouraged us to go to BU. And at first, I was in a Medics Explorers group in our town, and we were going to take a trip to the morgue. And when we were going to take a trip to the morgue, I said, "Oh, I'm not going to be a doctor." So there went my short-lived medical career. But it's a theme. It's a theme in my life for sure. And then I started out in business at BU. And then I actually left BU to pursue a career in cytotechnology as a lab tech. But I said, I can't sit in a lab all day. I'm a people person. So I had stayed in touch with my BU friends. And one of my dear friends, whose name is George Fitzgerald, told me that I had to come to, back then, SPC, School of Public Communication, now COM. And he said, I think you'd be great there. And one thing that I do want to share is that I did grow up in a very violent household. So one of the ways that I coped was to hone my intellect. And yes, I mean, I was National Honor Society, I was high school valedictorian. And it was pretty amazing that my intellect was the way that I was able to live through that. And BU just called to me.
And then you told me this. I'm sure it's a difficult thing to talk about, but 1 month as you're getting ready to start your freshman year, another trauma in your life. Can we ask you to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Jeff. So my dad was alcoholic. Fortunately, he was able to take care of me initially during polio, but after I came out of the leg brace, his alcoholism got really bad. So he was a very, very tortured soul. He also had an amazing, beautiful soul in many ways. He was a lawyer, and a brilliant man. But unfortunately, the alcoholism, I think mental illness, who knows what else back in the day. And on August 1st, 1971, he took his own life. And I had to make a decision about whether or not I was going to come to college. He had taken out a tuition plan, but unfortunately, there was a suicide clause in it. So I didn't know how I was going to pay for school. But I knew somehow, some way, there would be a way made. And as it turned out, he was a veteran. So I was entitled to a stipend. And so I applied for that. And I got to tell you, BU, if there were any place that I could have chosen to go, BU was the best because I had a wonderful resident assistant. When I first got here, I was very excited and everything, but then like probably the next day it sort of hit me.
Yep.
And I was just crying. And so the resident assistant said, listen, let me get you over to the counseling center. And they were wonderful. And I had individual and group therapy there. And it really helped me to begin to move forward and literally leave New York behind me, Jeff. I never went back to New York to live. I stayed in Boston.
And you had told me that experience, it's so interesting, the way in which these experiences that you folks have outside of the classroom that really kind of inform what happens in their careers and the rest of their lives.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what life was like. I'm so curious. I mean, everything going on in your life and then just college campus, BU in the 70s.
Oh, yes.
Kind of an incredible time. Tell me more about your life here, where you're living, where you're hanging out. How are you managing with all of this, all these things going on in your life? How are you able to have what you would describe as a normal college student experience?
Well, that was the miracle of it all, Jeff. I think having the support from the counseling center made a big difference. And I got work study, and I worked in the basement of the GSU, which was the games area. Now, I know you've been at BU for a while. Did you know about the bowling alley and the?
I have spent more hours than I care to count in the GSU. I certainly am aware of the alley. Absolutely. And to this day, the inner bowels of the GSU can still they have some ghosts of the bowling alley.
Well, I learned how to fix when the pins or the ball got stuck or somebody got a pin over. I mean, I worked on the lanes. I brushed down the pool tables. I loved it. I grew up bowling. In Westchester, we had 10 pins. So it was really cool to have that as my work study job. It was like, very familiar. And I think the familiarity brought me a lot of comfort. I was a part of the women's intercollegiate bowling team.
Oh, wow.
And so we actually traveled to different colleges and we competed. We did pretty well. We came in second place a number of times, and it was so great. And again, these are all things that were just propelling me forward and were positive experiences that were helping me to heal. The dugout was a place. And let's see, of course, the GSU, I mean, they had the best, well, now I don't eat meat, but they had the best cheeseburgers. They used to put a scoop of the cheddar cheese on it. So, those were kinds of the fun things that went on. When I got to COM, oh my goodness, it was the most incredible experience in terms of my classmates, in terms of my professors, but in terms of life outside of the classroom, yeah, I really had just a very wonderful experience. And the men's and women's bowling team, we had a lot of camaraderie and a lot of fun. And even my supervisors at the bowling alley, I mean, I still remember Dan and Manny, and they were just really great guys, and they were just so kind, and they would give me whatever work schedule I needed to accommodate my classes. So It was a wonderful environment, Jeff.
And then later on, you told me that you had an internship at the university that really had a pretty dramatic impact on the rest of your career trajectory, right?
It absolutely did. I was doing a PR internship at the BU Counseling Center, and that was actually my first job after BU. They hired me there, and the director, Dave Nichols at the time, said, "Well, I think you're being wasted in public relations," because I was also the intake coordinator. He said, "You have a real gift. You have empathy. You connect with the students." Of course, my own history is what helped me to do that. He said, "I really think you should go into counseling." And not me go into counseling, but into the career of counseling. So I thought about it. And, if I knew what I would have known, I don't consider it a mistake per se, but I wish I would have known that I could have really followed my bliss with public relations and writing and journalism. But at the time I didn't. And so I followed a path, and I got my master's in social work from Boston College. And I decided that I needed a different academic experience from BU. And so I had a social work career for all told 25 years.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that if you knew then what you know now, you might have done things differently, because I was thinking about you. You had this career as a social worker supporting veterans for almost 20 years. And I'm thinking, okay, so social work folks, MSWs, they know what they're getting into. And chances are they've had some things impact their life that leads them to want to go down this path of helping other people. But that seems like an incredibly grueling. I'm sure it was rewarding, but tell me about how you lasted so long doing that difficult work at the VA for 20 years.
That's a great question, Jeff. It was grueling. And at first, well, this is interesting because my first job at the VA, when I got hired, was as the Visual Impairment Services Team Coordinator. And that was for the blinded veterans. And part of my job was marketing the program. So that was awesome. Unfortunately, there was an all-boys network involved, and a person needed a favor. And so they gave him my job, despite my incredible success in the role. And the veterans were ready to go to the president of the United States and say, "You can't do this." But they did do it, which was very touching. But they did do it. So I became a medical social worker. Again, not a doctor, but a medical social worker, still having that interest. And yes, I mean, I literally saved lives, and I feel so blessed. I still am in touch with some of them on social media. And they, on Veterans Day or whatever, they're always posting on my wall, "Thank you so much. You believed in me. You heard me." But the flip side of that was that it was grueling, and I didn't know how to take care of myself. And I was a type A personality. Just on a lighter note, though, because of the writing skills that I developed at COM, I could outright any of my colleagues with my progress notes. And they were always so jealous. They're like, "How could you write that? And how do you have the time to do that?" And because we had an egg timer in journalism class, I became very efficient and proficient at writing my progress notes. But just getting back to it, it was grueling, and I burned out. And that's what happened.
With hundreds of thousands of BU alumni, you're never far from the BU community. Find alumni networks for our most populous regions on BU's exclusive networking platform, BU Connects, and be the first to know about in-person events in cities across the U.S. Sign up at buconnects.com and click Groups and Networks to find and join your local network.
It's interesting that you brought up the writing, because that's a theme that comes up again for you later that I definitely want to ask you about. But the incredible thing, you had, Mary, you had these horrible things happen to you as a kid, and then later in your life, 2006, yet another diagnosis that really changes your life again. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about what happened then?
Sure. So for about 10 years before I was diagnosed, I started having these weird symptoms, Jeff. I had fatigue. I had a lot of, well, I had pain throughout my whole life, but the physical pain started getting worse. I noticed that I was limping, like if I go on a walk or whatever. And I had tingling down my arm. I didn't, it was really strange. And I talked to my primary care provider about it. Finally in 2000, I mean, a lot of it I kept to myself. And then finally in 2006, I said, look, there's something wrong with me and I don't know what it is. And he said, oh, I know exactly what it is. He said, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Your twins are getting ready to leave home. It's psychiatric, take Paxil. I came home, I flushed the Paxil down the toilet because while there was a strong emotional, psychological component to it, Jeff, there was something very real physically going on with me. And when I had reconstructive leg surgery, my surgeon actually called me into, I was there for a post-op visit, and he called me into his office and he said, I need you to meet Mrs. G and her husband. And I'm like, I'm here for my post-op visit. Why am I meeting your other patient? And he said to me, well, Mrs. G is a polio survivor and she's living with post-polio syndrome. She needs surgery and I need you to get resources in to take care of her husband. So I ended up doing that. But then years later, it came back to me that, oh, there's something called post-polio syndrome. Let me Google it. And so I Googled it, and I was seen at the Spalding International Rehab Center for Polio, which is just down the street from my house in Framingham. And I had just an absolutely exhaustive workup of what could be going on physically. I mean, blood work and MRIs and something called an EMG, which is a very, very painful experience where they actually test the nerve conduction to the muscles. And everything came back everything came back negative except for one test, which was the muscle function test on blood. And that was in the blood work. And that was abnormal, which told them that, okay, well, it's a diagnosis of exclusion, but they said, this is what you're dealing with. And so they told me that I needed to quit my career. They said, the stress is going to make this progress even faster. They explained to me that it was a progressive neuromuscular disease. And there's a doctor who literally wrote the book on post-polio syndrome. And it looked really grim, Jeff. I mean, I did not know if I was going to have a future, but also the future looked really grim. And the left side of my esophagus was sluggish, which was why I was getting chronic respiratory infections. I was aspirating food into my lungs. And she said, you have to have a semi-soft diet. You need to do a chin tuck. You need to drink liquids through a straw. You can't talk while you eat. Well, that was really a challenge, needless to say, for me. But they put me in a toe-up leg brace. They gave me a cane. They said that I would be in a wheelchair in short order for the rest of my life. But if I quit my job, then I had some hope of stabilizing the symptoms where they were. They suggested that we move out of my Cape home or adapt this one. I might need a feeding tube. That they said that I needed this thing called a sleep apnea machine at night because my oxygen levels were low, et cetera, et cetera. So this was in December of 2006.
This is a laundry list of not great news.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? If it's me, I don't even know how I would respond, but you fairly shortly thereafter decided you weren't going to take any of that lying down.
Mm-hmm. Or sitting down.
Yeah, or sitting down. After everything that you've been through, how did you come up with the resilience to continue living your life?
Yeah. Well, at first I was angry. I was depressed. I was frustrated. There was a point at which, I was thinking I should just end this, but I had my family. I mean, I had so much to live for, but I just didn't know how I was going to live, and if I was going to have a physical life. So the first thing that happened that was an absolute gift was that on one of the MRIs, it showed that I actually had a disc pressing on a nerve in my neck. And that was something they could treat. So I was referred to Dr. Elabd, who I call my master magician, just an incredible physician, a true healer. And he said, how long have you been living with this pain? I said, oh, about 10 years. He said, what? Why so long? And I said, it's a long story kind of thing. He said, well, let's end it. So he did a couple of trigger injections. And that was like, oh my gosh, I have relief. And that's what was causing the tingling down my arm and the numbness on my face. So he referred me to a physical therapist who I call my earth angel, another earth angel physical therapist, Jeff. She was amazing. She knew that I was not destined to end up in a wheelchair. And before I had seen her, just shortly before I had seen her, I got still and I pray, I meditate, whatever you want to call it. So I was just blessed to meet her. And in February of 2007, early February, I met her in mid-February. I was home all alone. My husband was out with the twins. And I was starting to read the New Age teachers. Dr. Bernie Siegel, who was not New Age, but I'd known him throughout my life. He's sort of the father of mind-body medicine, Jeff. And I was reading all these wonderful stories of hope and healing, and Wayne Dyer and Tony Robbins, and I had everything spread out on my table. And Lisa Nichols, I had this newsletter that I had somehow found myself subscribing to, and it said that you need to start affirmations. I am so happy and grateful now that, and now that I can what? Well, now that I can create. And I'm like, create what? And as it turned out, this poem called Running the Race flowed out of me. Mm-hmm. And after that, my husband came home and I said, there's going to be life after the VA. I'm going to have a life. And I said, I used to write these rhyming poems, like for my kids' kindergarten class or for special occasions, right? And so I said, we got to set up a website. And my husband came up with the name of New World Greeting Cards, original poetry for every occasion. So I started having this vision of a life after the VA. And because you said, well, how did you do this? And I still look back in awe of how this all came about. And so I knew that I had to leave my career, and I think when anybody's thinking about taking a leap of faith, what's the number one thing? Money. Yep. And, I mean, I was making, $80,000 plus I had the health benefits and everything. And it was, how are we going to do this? And God bless my husband. He said to me, well, what good is all the money in the world going to be if you're in a wheelchair, or worse, you're not here anymore? So he was great. And my physical therapist was so supportive. And she showed me on a biofeedback machine what my job was doing to me. And in terms of the stress on my body, not even including the emotional stress. And she said, look, if you're going to stay there for any period of time, we have to order you adaptive equipment. Jeff, the adaptive equipment came on May 25th, my last day at the VA. So it never came. And I realized, that too was a sign that I needed to get out.
So you're continuing to work at the VA while you were having these terrible, terrible symptoms, living this life of pain. And so what was it that, was it your choice to stop working at the VA? And you were already thinking about this sort of like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I don't know, this idea of reinvention is fascinating, and the courage it takes to do that. But we haven't even talked about the marathon thing yet. So in addition to living a life of pain, figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of your life, you also decide to set this goal that you're going to run the Boston Marathon. Tell me more about that. It seems kind of crazy. People are encouraged to set SMART goals, and especially in something like physical therapy. Did people think you were just crazy?
Well, so the first poem that I wrote was called Running the Race.
Right.
And poems started flowing out of me where I was visualizing myself running free. And it was very powerful, very healing. It was my choice. And I think also the universe always sends us signs and, nudges us in certain ways. And for me, I actually had an abnormal mammogram in the midst of all of this. And I used the power of visualization to dissolve the tumor. And, they were ready to send me off to Mass General Oncology. I said, nope, it's gone. And they said, no, that's not possible. And I said, well, it is. So they decided it was an artifact on the mammogram. But I know, the mind-body connection is so powerful. And I've used it throughout this journey. And so at that moment, when I had the clear mammogram, it was actually my daughter who said, what are you waiting for? So I gave my 6 weeks notice, and I left on May 25th of 2007.
Okay.
In that fall, I hired a personal trainer, and I said, can you help me build on what happened at Spalding Rehab? Like, can you help me maybe get a little stronger? And long story short, 6 months later, she asked me for my next goals. And I said, oh God, I want to come out of this leg brace. I want to walk outside without my cane. I maybe want to take a dance class. I loved ballet before I had polio. And she's writing everything down, and let's diversify my workouts. And she has her hand on the doorknob, and I said, wait, I have one more goal. And she said, oh, what's that? And I said, I want to run the Boston Marathon next year for Spalding Rehab. Now, you're right. She could have said, you're out of your mind. You've never run a day in your life. You're still in a leg brace. She put down her stuff, and she said, you are going to need a pair of running shoes. And I was off and running. And that was in February of 2008. And on April 20th of 2009, my husband, daughter, and I crossed the finish line of the 2009 Boston Marathon and raised $10,535 for Spalding Rehab.
Incredible. You and I spoke about this briefly the other day, but this idea that you were handed down this verdict that you were going to be looking forward to the rest of your life using a wheelchair, and you just completely turned that around. I'm wondering what it is that you know now that you might share with other people who are maybe nearing the end of a career or getting to a certain stage in their life where they're thinking about their legacy and what might be next, and what advice you have to share with them about taking that later part of your life and making sure that you get to live the kind of life you want to.
Well, I think the first thing is to really follow your heart and to feel your bliss. I discovered my bliss when I was at BU, at COM, and I realized I loved writing. I love putting out a message. So I would say, what's your bliss? And if you've taken a career path other than what you might have done in college or, whatever it is, don't be afraid to do it. I wrote a poem called The Date with Destiny about, don't wait for the, what to hit the fan. I think, in hindsight, hindsight's always 2020, but I could have prevented a lot if I could have really tapped into what is my passion? What do I love to do? And I had really blocked off my creative side. So I think one of the most important things is to tap into your creativity, to tap into your physicality. Jeff, there's so many myths about aging in our society. And I'd like to recommend the book called Counterclockwise by Ellen Langard. Are you familiar with it?
You had mentioned it to me earlier, but I
Okay,
check it
yes.
out.
Yeah, it's an incredible book that talks about how our perceptions of how we age is going to affect how we age. And I was old at 53. I mean, I was completely deconditioned. I couldn't get off the couch. I couldn't get off the toilet seat without assistance. So you can actually, I'm living proof that you can turn that around. And one of the ways that I did it was through the power of my mind and my imagination and visualizing. And I journaled about a life after the VA. And so much has manifested. But find your joy, find your bliss, find your passion. And, in turn, we had talked about the monetization of it. Well, I self-publish and, it brings in a little income. I was very stubborn and I didn't apply for Social Security disability when I could have. And that would have eased a lot of financial stress. But you don't have to be disabled. You can get so creative, and you can also, think outside the box, be flexible. And you know what else? Don't be afraid to fail. I mean, I don't believe there are any failures. I just believe learning. But, my New World greeting cards business didn't do anything, but it was fun and I still do it for friends now. And, just let things happen and see where things are going to land. I mean, I really thought my story was in taking a leap of faith and becoming a poet and an author at the age of, 54, 53, 54. But in fact, my story is about the Boston Marathon run and a most unlikely runner and overcoming these challenges and sending a message of healing and hope and possibility. So, be open to where the path is going to take you. That is also vital.
Yeah. Well, I love springtime in Boston and Massachusetts, and one of those annual signposts that nicer weather is coming is the Boston Marathon. It's coming up in a few weeks here in Massachusetts. When that shows up on your calendar, when that time of year comes around in Boston, what does that do for you? What does it make you think about? What does it make you feel about?
Well, it's the 15th anniversary this year when we ran Boston. I get goosebumps just thinking about it, Jeff. It's such an incredible time. And, one of the things also that I think has really helped me heal is the running community. And we call it the Runner's Christmas. And it's when friends who I maybe see once a year come into Boston. I share my memories on Facebook to inspire others who are running and who may be running their first marathon. Also, the photos that I'm able to share are from a BU COM photojournalism grad student. And he had to find a runner to follow on Marathon Monday for his final project. And he went into Marathon Sports and they said, oh, it's got to be Team McManus. So we have the most incredible photos. So I get to relive it every year. And it's so joyful. And for me, it's also a sign of the miracle of spring, the miracle of healing, the miracle of renewal, of what's possible. And it's just really such a special time of year. And in my life, I celebrate the anniversary. We celebrate the anniversary every year and say, wow. And just to let people know, it took us 7 hours and 45 minutes from Hopkinton to Boylston Street, but that doesn't matter. We did it. And
that seems like a completely reasonable time.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
This is all amazing, and I'm so glad you were able to take time to share this story with us. And I've only known you for a couple days now, but you've got me already thinking about the kind of life I want to lead, and what the things that I think are obstacles about whether or not what people might do to get through some of those challenges they have in life. So, Mary, it was really fantastic to get a chance to get to know you a little bit. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, Jeff, thank you. And one thing I also want to share is that you never know what door is going to open, and always be open to that. 10 days before I left my career at the VA, I was actually standing in Marsh Chapel, and I had written a poem in memoriam for former Dean of Students, Admiral Johnson. And one of my first gigs, if you will, was at his memorial service. Now, when I started on that journey, did I ever think that I would be at Marsh Chapel, sharing this beautiful poem memorializing a dean of students? So, those are the kinds of things when you think about obstacles, think about possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks again, Mary.
Thank you, Jeff.
My thanks again to Mary for joining me on the podcast and sharing her truly inspiring story. I love the photo that we have of Mary that we're using in our episode graphics where she's out for yet another run. And I want to thank our colleague, Jackie Ricciardi from Boston University Photography, for allowing us to use it. As we sign off, I want to make sure we add here: if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health and thoughts of suicide, please call, text, or chat the new 3-digit 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, formerly the National Suicide Prevention Line. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to Proud to Be You. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your episodes. The Proud to Be You podcast is produced by Boston University and our partners 5 Tool Productions, a BU alumni-owned, Boston-based company specializing in video production, live streaming, and content marketing. Our theme from Artist.io is Think About Lights by Ben Fox. All additional media in this episode has been shared by our guest. To learn more about Proud to Be You, visit bu.edu/proud to be you.